Hello! Okay, for those of you returning, welcome back to the channel, and for those of you that are new here, thank you for joining me. Here is my spoiler-free review of Heart Eyes, a romantic, dark comedy slasher that I managed to catch last night at an advanced showing. It doesn't release here in the UK until next weekend, but I believe it's already out in the States. It came out this weekend, and I've been really looking forward to this movie. It's directed by a Josh Ruben, and I really like the look of the film from the trailers. It looks like that type of sort of over-the-top B-movie gritty horror film, you know, with that kind of 90s, early 2000s vibe, or even a 70s and 80s retro vibe about it. And the trailer, I really liked the trailer, and it really attracted me to this movie, so I was really looking forward to checking Heart Eyes out. And so the story of Heart Eyes revolves around the Heart Eyes killer, a masked murderer who targets couples on Valentine's Day. The film follows Ali, played by Olivia Holt, who works in advertising, and Jay, played by Mason Goodin, a charming marketing expert. As they navigate their own romantic entanglements, they find themselves in the crosshairs of the Heart Eyes killer on Valentine's Day. Okay, let me be honest here. When this movie first opens, you get this scene, you get these two characters, this couple, they're proposing to each other. It's very romantic, it's very cheesy and silly and over the top. And what this moment does is set the tone for the entire film. It sort of showcases, or it shows you sort of the style of humour that you're going to get when it comes to this film. So the comedic, you know, the comedy aspect of this story. And it worried me, because when it comes to the style of humour that you are introduced to in this opening scene, for me personally, and this is my own personal preference, it's not really the type of humour that works for me. But as the scene evolves, I just found myself being incredibly entertained and engaged with what it was that was unfolding within the frame. And that was because I was just amazed by how you had these two different genres, romantic comedy with humour. Like, think Scream times 100. Like, that is what I feel like you should expect when it comes to sort of the comedy aspect of this movie. It's Scream times 100. And how that's blended in sort of with that kind of the horror element, I just thought was incredibly well done. It was very seamless, and in this opening scene, it sort of transitions from being very silly, cheesy, over the top, and at first did get me worried, and then it sort of transitions more into sort of the horror element of the movie, and I just felt like the way in which it was constructed and crafted was incredibly effective, and this opening scene does such a good job at setting up the tone and what to expect with this experience. I just found myself locked in right from the start. And another reason to why I felt like this film, this overall experience worked for me, is because it knows what it is, and it doesn't pretend to be something that it isn't. You know, this is a movie that is clearly inspired by 90s, early 2000s romantic comedies and horror films. And it blends those two genres in a way that is incredibly clever, and a lot of it is brought to life through the writing as well as the performances. And it doesn't shy away from what it is. It leans heavily into the type of movie that it wants to be. And, you know, it indulges. It brings to life the classic romantic comedy and horror tropes from the genre, you know, from that certain era of filmmaking. And it's as a result of that is why I felt like this entire experience was incredibly effective. You know, yes, you can take a step back and look at it from a surface level and go, well, it's just a very generic romantic comedy, you know, with very sort of generic sort of kind of slasher horror sort of setup. But it knows that it is. It's not pretending to not be a generic romantic comedy. It leans into that. And I just thought it was, like I said, incredibly clever and smart. I actually found myself chuckling. I was laughing because of how the humour would be delivered. A lot of it is effective due to the performances from our two main actors, Olivia Holt and Mason Goodin. It's how they deliver the humour, which is in part, for me anyway, why I felt like it was so effective. But it's also down to its very smart, sharp, witty writing. It's very to the point, and it's very dry, it's very dark, and yes, it's also kind of very silly and corny and cheesy and over the top, but it knows that's what it is. This film is very aware of itself, and I felt like that is why it was, for me anyway, as effective as it was. And with all that being said, doesn't mean that everyone is going to have the same experience that I did with this movie. No. I think some people are going to be wanting or hoping that it lent more into sort of the horror aspect. There are some people that might be put off from sort of the comedic aspect of the movie. Like I said, it's almost like Scream on steroids. And not everyone is going to like that. And I'll be honest, like I said, at first, I was a little bit concerned, but it's how all of these elements are brought together here and brought to life by the performances and the writing and in how the movie is constructed. That is why it worked for me and why I found this film to be incredibly entertaining. It was fun. You could sense that it was a love letter to those B-movie 90s romantic comedy horrors. And even though it's very familiar, and yes, it's generic, it knows it's generic. It knows what it's doing, but it's very witty. It's very smart. It's very clever. And I just, like I said, I keep repeating myself now, but I found myself having a really good time with this movie, even though, okay, when it comes to personal preference, and after watching the trailer, perhaps, yes, I would have liked something that lent more into that horror aspect, perhaps, and sort of more into kind of like a gritty sort of B-movie horror vibe, which it is there, but it's blended with that the romantic comedy aspect. And I just feel like, personal preferences aside, what they are setting out to achieve here within this movie, I just felt like they did very, very well. And that's why, it was very easy for me to just go, well, do you know what? I would have preferred that. I would have preferred that angle, perhaps, for it. Maybe I would have preferred for them to have dialed back a little bit on the humour. But do you know what? It was still doing what it needed to do. And that was to entertain and just be engrossed and immersed for the full 90 minutes. And I was having a blast. It sets up the tone within the opening scene, and it maintains that tone throughout the entire experience. And you've got the blend of these two genres, and it's just very seamless. And you'll get moments with characters that I found to be incredibly endearing, and it would just amaze me, because you would get a moment that could have easily have just stood out and gone, oh, that really didn't feel right there within everything else, within it, all sort of these different kind of styles and genres that you've got you within the movie. You'd have this sort of character moment with two characters opening up about themselves and their history. But it's because of the way in which it's written. It never once feels like it's a moment that doesn't belong within the style or the type of movie that they are attempting to create here. And it just all goes back to what I said about how all of these different elements come together in a way that is incredibly smart, incredibly clever. And this is all aided, like I've already touched on, by the great performances from our two main characters, Olivia Holt and Mason Goodin. And they do a fantastic job at balancing all these different elements, from the horror sort of then transitioning to the sort of the comedic aspect of the story. And it's done through the performances in a way that's also very seamless. But also, Olivia Holt, for me, was the standout. And what I liked about her performance is what she did here with her character was, there are moments where the character is being serious, is the character is reflecting what she's going through personally, as well as the horror. but also she can be incredibly funny at the same time by being serious in certain moments. And that's, for me, is a very clever thing to do, to be able to pull off sort of the most serious aspect, if you can call it that, of this movie, as well as being incredibly funny at the same time. And in a way that doesn't feel too much. It doesn't feel too forced. That it just, even though the comedy or the humour is sort of a bit over the top and silly, she sort of brings it down to a level through a performance where you just can't help but laugh. And that is something that I just found very endearing about how she was bringing the character to life. It wasn't too cartoon-like. It was still a character where she felt human as a result of how she was bringing the character to life. And the same goes for Mason Gooding. He was also really, really good here. You know, you'll have a couple of character moments where the film just sort of slows down for a moment, and it never once feels uneven. It never once feels like the movie has just stopped. For me personally, the pacing was perfect, and you really kind of needed these moments to sort of really kind of gravitate, or to be able to sort of connect to the characters. And it's in these moments and through the writing and just through the performances that kind of allows this film to have a humanity about it. It sort of injects this humanity into what is a very absurd, over-the-top premise. And again, it's sort of how all of this is sort of balanced throughout the entire experience, from the comedic aspect to the horror, which, I'll be honest, in many ways the horror does take a little bit of a back seat here, but it's there. You know, it is a presence. The horror is a presence, but it works. For me, it works. And you know what? I never thought I would come out of a movie like this, especially after sort of being introduced, you know, when you were introduced to sort of what it is you're going to expect in that opening scene. I really did not expect myself to come out of this movie thinking, I really liked the cinematography in that. I really liked how the camera was used in certain moments. And I did. From a filmmaking perspective, it does a really good job, you know, from a technical perspective, from how the camera is used. They do a really good job at capturing that 90s and early 2000s aesthetic from just how the film is shot and how the film looks. Like that opening scene, for example, and don't worry, there's going to be no spoilers, but it opens in a way, you know, from the colour palette, from how the camera is used, from the performances. It has that kind of certain vibe of a certain type of movie, a certain genre, which is romantic comedy. But then as the horror kicks in and as that scene evolves, it transitions in a way that's very seamless. Again, the colour palette transitions along as that horror sort of creeps in to sort of the experience. It to adjust to reflect how the movie is sort of bouncing back and forth and transitioning from romance, comedy to horror. And it's all done through a technical aspect as well. And it showcases this for me in the opening scene. Like, we've gone from this kind of very cheesy, silly, over-the-top 90s romantic comedy vibe, and then we've seamlessly somehow transitioned into something that is still, you know, it's still got that kind of silly, over-the-top nature to it, or aesthetic to it, but the tone somewhat transitions more into that kind of horror element, but it never once feels out of place. And that's perhaps me in a long-winded way trying to say how I felt like sort of all these different elements, from the comedy to the horror, and it all sort of seamlessly works together to create what I felt was a very charming, endearing, fun, entertaining B-movie that is a love letter to two different genres, and it sort of blends them together in a way that I thought was incredibly clever. Is it perfect? No. But I couldn't help, and you know, going back to certain preferences, I'm going to hold my hands up. I'm one of those people that perhaps wanted it to lean more into the horror aspect and sort of, you know, perhaps dial back on the comedy, but I'm not going to deny that it didn't work, and I just couldn't help but not, you know, be entertained.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
And have a fun time, a good time. There are moments that made me laugh. It made me chuckle. And I just found myself really sort of gravitating towards these characters. And I thought that was an achievement, because when it comes to movies like this, with the sort of this type of humour that it's got within it, you know, it's not the type of humour that would usually work for me, but it's because this movie knows what it is, and that is trying to be, you know, it's not trying to be anything else other than the type of movies that it is homaging and what it's wanting to be. That is why it was incredibly effective for me. So, look, enough rambling on from me. They are my thoughts on Heart Eyes, and I will be giving Heart Eyes a... They're my thoughts on Heart Eyes, but what do you guys think? Have you seen it yet? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you agree or disagree with anything I've said? Then please let me know in the comments below and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, then thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to see future movie reviews from just some random Welsh geek rambling on, then please hit the subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot to me. My next video will be a late review of the Jurassic World Rebirth teaser trailer. And so yeah, I'm really looking forward to sharing with you all my thoughts on that. So yeah, thank you again for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll be catching you guys soon.